I want to talk to you here a little bit about Plato to give you an introduction to this excerpt from the Republic. Plato was the student of Socrates, was a student of Socrates in a sense, although Socrates claimed not to really teach anything. But he was a follower of him. He seems to have followed him around and then tried to learn from him. And then while Socrates didn't write down his teachings, Plato was the major writer about Socrates. And the way that Plato presents Socrates is always, or at least almost always, in dialogue. Okay, so it's almost as if he writes a bunch of philosophical plays, some long, some are shorter, um, that shows Socrates asking questions, dismantling uh, bad arguments, at least those according to Plato, and exploring wisdom. And that's really what philosophy means. It's the love of wisdom, the pursuit of wisdom. And we don't necessarily have to think that everything that Socrates says in Plato's plays is something that he really said, or that Plato always agrees in a sense with what he has his Socrates character saying, but they are probably part of this larger exploration of um, philosophy and wisdom in dialogue, in conversation. Okay. Now, the excerpt that you have is from the Republic, which is Plato's most famous work. And the context for this is that um, in the larger work is it begins with a question of what does it mean to live a just life? What does it mean to live a good life? And what Socrates has the conversation participants do, in a sense, is to consider not one life, but what if you expanded a life into an entire city? What if you took me and instead of asking what could I do, well, you imagine me as a city, and then you think about how the different parts of the city relate to each other. Um, because if you can think about justice on a city level, maybe you can think about it on an individual level. So it's not just that Plato, as people will sometimes say, is imagining what would the ideal city look like. That's part of the idea, but it's also thinking about what would a good life of an individual look like if you imagine the metaphor of a city. Now, um, one of the things that Plato wants is he wants reason to be in control, and so he imagines this idea here of the guardians, the philosopher kings who are um, the rulers of the city and trained to be good rulers of the city, just as he thinks our reason, informed by philosophy, ought to govern a good life. Okay, and then the rest of the city is the desires, which he imagines as the mass of the people. Okay, our desires relating to our bodily urges and desires. Um, and then in the middle is what he calls the spirited parts that, um, in a sense, the passions away that are should assist the um, the reason, the philosopher kings, in ruling the mass of the people. So they act like police or soldiers. And so their good life would be reason and control, enlisting the passions, the spirited parts of us to control our desires so that we're not dominated by our desires for food, desires for sex, desires for alcohol. We're not living a life just completely blown along by our desires. Okay, that's the kind of city and the kind of individual, in the sense that Plato's envisioning. And then he spends a great deal of time thinking about this. Now, the question then like would be, what role does poetry and music play in all this? And here he's taking up that question of like poetry as imitative, as imitating things, and then um, what effect would that have on the city or on the individual? Does What about when poetry is imitating bad things? What about when stories and that poetry is telling is imitating bad things? Um, what does that mean? And so here he's going to think about poetry as imitative and the possible effects that it has on the reader or even on the city.